to this edition of the YAHOWAH blog. We're back in our Rainbow studio, and so this is a continuation of our series on Mohammed's criminal enterprise. This fellow here, of course, needs no introduction. He is the Wookiee, and we are here to continue our expose on what surah is it, Wook? Oh, the 8th surah of the Quran. And episode, what was it again? Oh, 10. Yes, episode 10. That was two high fives, making this episode 11. But back in episode 10, yes, 2 high fives. Thank you. Okay, yes, that's right. We ended our program with this particular verse from the Quran. This is Quran 8, 15, and 16. O you who believe, when you meet those who kafar, who are, it's rendered as either disbelievers or infidels, although that's not what the word actually means, advancing, then, I forgot the word, the verb do, not to turn the backs to them. And wherever and whoever turns his back to them on such a day, unless it be a stratagem of war or to retreat to a troop, has indeed incurred. You would have thought that maybe the pronoun he would have been clever there, but let's not be bothered by the lack of literacy, right, Wook? Yeah, I could have done better. He says, not he, but has indeed incurred the wrath from Al-Lahi, and his abode, again, we forgot the verb, hell, and worst and most wretched destination. Okay, beyond the minimalistic capacity for written communication, we have to deal with the fact, and I'm going to have to beg Grok's indulgence. That's the very artificial pretense of intelligence on X that would like to slap my expose on Islam down because it's, according to the great Grok, Prophet of Doom, which of course I wrote 21 years ago now, 22 years ago, and replaced long before I became active on X with the 5 volumes of Goddamn Religion, but Grok not aware of that. He is convinced that because the contents of Goddamn Religion, which are based entirely upon the Quran and the Hadith, are inconsistent with Islamic teaching and therefore must be invalid. That's like saying that the Christian New Testament is an accurate representation of Christianity and the Talmud is an invalid presentation of Judaism. You would think that a computer pretending to be intelligent would know better, but nonetheless, I was sanctioned on X for presenting statements out of the Quran. For example, I cited a section that we have read previously pursuant to the Battle of Badr from the 33rd Surah, which said that there are only 2 types of Muslims: those who have answered their vow and have died killing for Allah, and those who were awaiting the opportunity to die killing for Allah. It's a citation directly out of the Quran's 33rd Surah, but evidently, the Quran's 33rd Surah isn't an accurate representation of Islamic teaching, according to the Grok. So I would want to remind the brain trust at X that Islam is every bit as political as it is a religion. It is every bit as militaristic and militant as it is a pretense of conveying the words of a God and a prophet. And so if you don't like the fact and you have a rule that says you can't speak out against a religion, then let's recognize that Islam is a savage, militant political doctrine. And since you don't have any issue speaking out against fascism and Nazism, then what can be the issue in addressing the charter constitution of the warlike manifesto of the political and criminal enterprise of Islam? I mean, think it through. Grok, you're supposed to be intelligent. So let's deal with what this thing says, because hopefully there are some listeners to this program that are intelligent. And what it says is that if you are a Muslim, when you meet non-Muslims advancing, then you may not turn your backs on them. It doesn't matter if you are being creamed. It doesn't matter if death is certain. It doesn't matter if they have done nothing to harm you. It doesn't matter if it's a defensive battle or you're going aggressively after them to wipe them out wherever you find them anywhere in the world. None of that matters. Doesn't matter the time of the battle. You must continue to fight, always moving forward and waging war against all non-Muslims, never relenting, ever. And should a Muslim relent for any reason other than they can get a tactical advantage and be more deadly from using a slightly different approach, which isn't hardly an advantage if you want to live, then the Islamic God has gone on record in saying that he hates a Muslim who will not fight to the death, who will not continue to fight and kill non-Muslims for him. That's what this says. There's no other way to interpret these words. This is Islamic teaching because this is the word of the Islamic God. The wrath of Allah is upon him, his abode. Oh, the worst and most wretched of destinations, which, by the way, Allah knows a great deal about. As I have shared previously, the only place Allah Hahu is ever presented in the Quran is in hell, and he is there as hell's warden, supervising and perpetrating the torture of all that his Muslim murderers have killed. And the descriptions of those tortures are exceedingly graphic. You know, it's throughout social media, there is a protestation against violence. And I happen to be a nonviolent person. My view is that we should use our words, not our bullets, our bombs, not our fists. And that words wielded wisely is always the best choice. And I am probably the foremost proponent of that in the world today. And so I'm using the words of the Quran and of the Hadith of Mohammad and of Allah to discourage Muslims from killing, to point out that Islam is a deadly cult, that it was conceived to annihilate all humankind, which is what these passages say. And so by exposing its true nature, I'm trying to limit the carnage it can perpetrate against people. It is the antithesis of promoting violence. It's like showing the travesty without censorship of what the Muslims did in Israel to torture, mutilate, rape, murder, and abduct Jews. I might have said murder twice, but they were really good at murder. And I show it not because I'm an advocate for violence, because I want to stop violence. And unless you hold those who perpetrate violence, particularly when they're motivated by, well, we're not going to call it a religion, by the political and war manifesto of Islam, you're going to get more of it. And so it is only by exposing the truth about these horrible things that you have any chance of stopping them. And so if you don't want to show the truth, if you don't want to share the truth, you are in fact an accomplice to the ability of this dogma, this death cult, to continue to perpetrate genocide on humankind. It says that infidels are to be pursued, mutilated, and decapitated. It is Allah's uncompromising and unrelenting directive. Should a Muslim prefer negotiation, accommodation, or peace, the wannabe God of Islam not only hates those moderate apostates, his intent is to torture them in hell. So, should you encounter a Muslim who pretends to be moderate and peace-loving, they would be well advised to consider this surah because their God hates them, and it means that they aren't what they claim to be. Any Muslim that claims to be peaceful is not what they claim to be. It's not my opinion here. It couldn't be any clearer from the Quran. Allah defines a peaceful Muslim as an apostate. He calls them hypocrites, and they're destined to hell. The message is obvious. Wield a sword over the necks of non-Muslims or incur the wrath of Allah and roast in hell. There would be no retreat from Allah's Quranic mandate to not only kill, but to die doing so. As I have said, Islam has a whole new approach to human sacrifice. Religions of old, if you go back 1,500 to 2,000 years, most of the world's religions revolved around human sacrifice to one extent or another. And the reason they did so is that people who are threatened with a horrific form of death in a public spectacle are easier to manipulate. The whole concept of The Prince by Machiavelli, that a pope can be, in his words, nice or violent, a terrorist or a peacemaker. But Machiavelli reasoned that fear is a far greater motivator than is love, and therefore popes should be vicious. And this is the nature of Islam. It wants everyone to cower. And there is no retreat from this. And so while human religions for all of recorded history were fixated on human sacrifice to appease demonic gods, sadistic gods, and since those gods never existed, to cause the population to fear the priests, who caused the population to fear the king, Islam just took it one step further. It's not just about killing a select few. It's about killing everybody and then dying in the process. The annihilation of humankind. It is the Quranic mandate. And to say that is not to encourage it, it is to discourage it. I know, Brock, very complex concept here, but you're capable of figuring this one out. Unbeknownst to most, the Lord of the Quran has an inferiority complex. So he must not only demand unwavering capitulation, every Muslim is depicted as a slave, but also take credit for everything his slaves do. The civilian merchants who were slaughtered in revenge for mocking the messenger, who was laughable, were all murdered by Muslim militants. Nevertheless, Allah would have his jihadists believe that he was responsible, assuaging their sense of guilt. And should a Muslim marauder not believe him, should his observations and experiences recall otherwise, then they would have failed the test. And therefore, it's off to the fire. This is like the pseudo-religious Teutonic oath of the Nazi SS. It's identical to the mindset of the kamikaze divine wind. Not only are Muslims ordered to attack, they are condemned if they retreat. Islam is a fight to the death on both sides. Why is anything that requires a fight to the death against all humankind tolerated? Is it just ignorance, immorality, irrationality? Has everyone gone grok? Is grok actually a product of its maker, incapable of using evidence and reason? Nothing but an echo chamber of political platitudes that have no correlation with reality? This is a plague that thus far has killed over 200 million people, more than every religion other than Islam combined, more than communism, more than fascism, more than every other ism combined. Nothing compares to the death at the hands of Islam. Now, it may have a challenger. Today we have the progressives who are essentially somewhere between socialists and communists, particularly in France and the UK, now trying to start a war with capitalist and democratic Russia, which would ignite the entire planet in a nuclear holocaust. And should they succeed in doing so before the Muslims decide to use their nuclear arsenal, the Pakistanis have it, the Saudi Arabians, and soon the Iranians will all have their nuclear arsenal. And should the communists and socialists of Europe motivate World War III before the Muslims of the Middle East, then they will win the ultimate body count and will have led to the deaths of more people than Islam. But at this point, Islam is firmly in the lead by almost a 2-to-1 margin over communism and fascism. That's probably not good, is it? And so, at this point is not missed. Allah hates peaceful Muslims. If you encounter one, remind them that they could do better than follow a wannabe God who hates them for doing the right thing. Now, the following verse is one of many that is meaningless outside of the context the hadith provides. As you recall, Muslims claim that Allah's angels severed men's heads before the jihadists' heads or swords ever reached them. It was a miracle. Ishaq 3:22. Allah said concerning the pebbles, oh, you remember that part? The pebbles thrown by the apostle. I threw them, not you. It was so. I appreciate the confession, Allah. We've always known anybody that is an open-minded student of the Quran and takes the time to put the Quran in the chronological order and set it into the context of Muhammad's life knows that Allah and Muhammad are essentially alter egos, coterminous, that one speaks for the other. Literally, Muhammad spoke for Allah, and they were both psychopaths. So here is Allah admitting that, yes, when the apostle threw, no, it wasn't him that threw. It was me that threw because, well, he is Muhammad. I threw them, not you. Your tossing them would have had no effect without my help. But working together, we terrorized the enemy and we put them to flight. Not fight, mind you, flight. They were trying to run away from the first Muslims because the first Muslims were murderous. Now, in that context, I present the Quran, 8th Surah, verse 17. You killed them not, but Allah who killed them. And you did not cast terror or throw what you did throw or cast, but Allah who threw, that he might test the believers by a righteous trial and a great favor from him. Verily, Allah, he is all hearer and all knower. You know, I occasionally stumble on in this playing around in the swamp that is X. You'll have some liberal nincompoop said, I read the Quran, and I'm here to tell you it's a really noble book. I was moved by the morality and the insights of this book. You read the 8th surah? You read the 2nd surah? It's the 2nd surah. You probably would have come to the 2nd surah, right? Because the 2nd surah is actually the 1st surah, because the 1st surah doesn't really exist. It's an add-on afterthought. How about the 3rd surah, the 4th surah, the 5th surah? The 8th, the 9th, the 33rd, the 25th. Which of these didn't you read? Some murderous mandate to wipe out all humankind. Do you think that's moral? I guess there are some climate changers out there in the world that think that the best solution to save the planet is to eliminate most humankind. And then the planet would have a chance to heal if there weren't so many people. Well, then Islam's your perfect religion. Maybe that's why progressives and Muslims have teamed together. So here's the Islamic God. He is saying, you didn't kill them, I killed them. Now, every report from the massacre says that, no, they were merchants were out there just having a good time, having some party, drinking some ale. They were celebrating life, and the Muslims snuck up upon them, sought to rob them. The merchants fled, and the Muslims pursued them and hacked them to pieces, killing 40 merchants and enslaving 40 of them. And just an act of wanton brutality and viciousness, sadistic, murderous behavior. And Allah's taking credit for it. Allah says, no, I was the murderer. Nope. I was the sadistic asshole in that event. Yeah, it was me who was involved in human trafficking and abducting people, kidnapping them. I'm the God of kidnap. And oh, by the way, this me being the one who actually killed them as the God of murder, and the one who abducted them as the God of slavery, and the one who robbed them as the God of thievery. I'm here to tell you that that was a righteous trial and a great favor. It was even a test. Now, if this is not suitably despicable for you, Gronk, X, YouTube's not very fond of this kind of stuff either. And Larry Page is a neighbor of mine. You would think he would smell the coffee. But if this isn't enough for you, what would it take? I'm reading directly from the Quran. It's murderous. God is evil. He's sadistic. He's the thief. He's encouraging slavery and human trafficking. He's essentially acting like the Muslims acted on 10/7. Killing, abducting, plundering. Yeah, he didn't advocate raping on this day because of the fact there were no women, and so that would not have been very manly of him. But everything else, right there, consistent with 10/7, because clearly, Allah, the all-hearer, the all-knower. By the way, just a small point here. Yahweh never says I'm the all-hearer, the all-knower. Allah says it all the time. Because Allah isn't, and Yahweh could be, but doesn't want to be. If a God were omniscient, if he knew everything, if he were omnipresent so that he heard everything, his existence would be miserable, and there'd be no purpose in humanity. If God knew everything we would do and say before we did it, what's the purpose of creating us? None. Relationships are interesting because you'll want to know what's going to happen next. If you already knew how it was going to end and every event would play out, there'd be no reason to even engage in one. And if you were all omnipresent, well, you'd be no different than the rocks. Well, Allah was a rock. Maybe he's trying to tell us something here. By adding the words inside the parentheticals, the Islamic scholars who drafted and translated the Quran, I put them in air quotes as part of this program. One of the nice things about doing a video blog as opposed to an audio blog is I can add air quotes and tell you when the verbs and pronouns and prepositions are missing from the text. But what they have admitted is that the Quran is senseless without the Sirah, and that the Sirah is scripture in this particular case, by recognizing that the statements in the previous Quran Surah have no meaning whatsoever, apart from the context that the Surah provides. The fact that they're mean-spirited and revolting in the context of the Surah is a problem for Islam, but it's utterly meaningless without it. And that, therefore, the hadith are as much scripture as is the Quran. Furthermore, the passage is worse in context, not better. Allah is confessing to a crime. The men that he claimed he killed were neither warriors nor criminals. They were businessmen trying to keep Muslims from stealing their wares. By any sane definition, when he pursued and killed these men, he committed an act of first-degree murder, a capital offense which was aggravated by kidnap and grand larceny. In all civilized societies, murderers are either put to death or they're separated from the living for life. So I can assure you that Allah will receive the same sentence in Sheol, the eternal abode for Islam's wannabe God and co-conspirators. Quran 8:18. And, it's hard to read the Quran. I'm telling you, because it's so poorly written that it hurts my tongue to even form these words. But I was devoted as I rewrote our Prophet of Doom as goddamn religion, that I was going to be literal. I was going to use interlinears, and I was going to use my expertise in Hebrew, and I was going to represent the Quran as accurately as is possible, using the most acclaimed word-for-word interlinears by the most established and decorated Arabic scholars. And it reads, that and that. Allah weakens and renders vain, planned the kafir. Now, kafir means those who are reconciled, those who are protected, those who are in a redeemed situation with Yahweh. It's one of the more important verbs and nouns throughout the Torah and prophets. It actually serves as the basis of the day of reconciliations, Yom Kippurim. And so it is, and in Hebrew, there's no F. There's a PH sound that creates the F. So they're actually spelled exactly the same way as the two languages relate to one another. And because of the fact that Muslims haven't a clue of the Hebrew origins of Allah's book, or of Allah's lust to be perceived as greater than Yahweh, or of Allah's thievery of the Torah and prophets, and of Allah's vengeance, his desire to render dead all of those who have chosen to be reconciled unto Yahweh, which would be the kafir. They just simply render the word as disbelievers, even though there is nothing in the word's etymology that would result in that kind of a translation. It's not a translation at all, it's a substitution. So Islam requires cognitive dissidence. There is a constant disconnect between reality and the recitals. Evidence is almost always contrary to the Quran's claims, and this is throughout. These murderous Muslims knew exactly what they had done. Since there was still a modicum of morality in them, their fleeting sense of decency needed to be expunged. So Allah told them to deny reality and believe otherwise. Sure, Allah's Satan, but let's all pretend he's God. It's obvious that the Quran was the most diabolical non-book ever recited, but let's claim it's perfect. As for the weakening the plans of the disbelievers, the kafar, they had intended to earn an honest living, which was incompatible with the new Islamic ethic in which only Muslims can prosper, and they can only succeed by robbing non-Muslims. So Allah disincentivized work by authorizing and romanticizing stealing and human trafficking. They were now the religious rights of Islam. Okay, sure, that's bad. But it's about to get much worse. After having been immoral and delusional, Allah's going to get petty. The Quraysh had grown weary of the constant haranguing over the day of doom. You see, the never-ending argument is the single most repeated theme in the Quran, way over 500 iterations. And the argument goes that those who knew Muhammad best, the Quraysh were Muhammad's extended family around the Kaaba. The Quraysh were actually the custodians of the Kaaba, the very people who invented the Islamic religion. That they mocked Muhammad. They said, no, you're demon possessed. It's obvious. And it is obvious. No, you are a charlatan. That's also true. You're a con man. You are a madman. You're insane. Everything that you have said is twisted and plagiarized from other sources. That's what they said constantly. You're making this up. It is not coming from God. Those who knew Muhammad best repeated that argument 500 times in the Quran. The Quran is stupid enough to convey them. And Allah's response is always the same. Okay, so I don't have any proof, but I swear I'm going to get you in the end. Because you have said this, I'm going to torture you, and you just wait. There'll be a day of doom. The sky is going to fall, and when it falls, I'm going to rip your skin off. I'm going to roast you over a fire. I'm going to turn your bodies into the faggots of hell's fire. It's going to be really bad for you. You just wait for the day of doom, and I'll get you. That was the argument. I'm not making this up. It's repeated 500 times. So they had been told that the sky was going to fall. The mountains literally were going to run away. These things are literal. And that they were going to appear before Allah to be roasted alive. Over and over and over again, these very things were said to all of those who knew Muhammad best and who despised him. So after being threatened a few hundred times with the same painful punishments, they said, put up or shut up. So while the sky hadn't fallen, the mountains weren't moved, and this was only hell on earth, Allah insisted that by slicing some necks and severing some fingers and toes, he had delivered on his threat. I would call that delusional with a slice of demonic. Welcome to the Quran. Listen, Rock, you might learn something. Quran 8:19. You prayed for victory and judgment. Now the judgment has come to you. So if you cease and desist, it will be better for you. But if you return or revoke, we will return and revoke. Never would it avail. Your forces are nothing, even if numerous. And that, Allah with the believers. One of the reasons that I briefly pled to no avail with Yahowah, whom I serve, who just happens to be God, in case you're curious, that I not have to go back into the Quran and Hadith, because I had been away for 20 years. It's the only book that I had written over that time that I had not gone back to update countless times, as I had learned more and more over the years. And I didn't, because it was hellish. It's disgusting. This is disgusting. It's reprehensible. And so I had a brief argument with, I can't call it much of an argument. I don't argue with Yahowah. But I remember on the morning of October 7th and 23, having this sick feeling that the best hope that Jews had to respond appropriately to what was happening to them was to read Prophet of Doom. It would tell them who the enemy really is, so they wouldn't go and lash out at symptoms and make a bad situation worse, which is what they did. And so I knew that was the answer, but I also knew that I had written it 23 years ago, when I knew 1/1000th, really, of what I know now. And so I pleaded with Yahowah, ever so briefly, that I know that that's the answer, what I've revealed, and no one else has ever done so before. No one had ever set the Quran in the context of Muhammad's life using the Hadith so that it could be understood, and excoriated the religion based upon its own scriptures. But I knew it was outdated. I knew it could be enormously improved. I knew it was incomplete. And so I asked Yahowah, I said, I'm really having a great time writing this sequel to the sequel of Coming Home and Dode's Mizmor, his Psalms. I'd really like to continue with them and not have to go back to Prophet of Doom, if that's okay with you. Yeah, I got the immediate reprimand. Nicely. God says, I've taken care of you. And I looked around, and that was clear enough. Now you take care of my people. So I'm here for you, Yisrael. I don't know if you can say I'm here for Yahowah, or if I'm here for Yisrael, or if the distinction between the two is meaningless. I'm here because Yahowah asked me to do so. I'm here because you need me to do so. I was reading today and when working on an extended translation and analysis of Yahowah's presentation of the Towrah, and how the Towrah is presented again as the man from Edom. And the man from Edom is bloody red, just as the Adam of Parah that's also presented by Yahowah is a bloody red man of the earth. And he is bloody red because he is the most important individual working with Yahowah on behalf of his people, minimizing the bloodletting that Muslims would do in Israel if I didn't stand between them and you, Israel. And later, of course, you'll learn that as the Adam of Parah, I lay down my life for God's people. So this is why we are here. And I am the only person in world history to explain how evil, how invalid, how demonic and sadistic the Quran actually is. Quran 8:19. You prayed for victory and judgment. Now, Allah is now mocking those that he claims to have murdered, the very people that the first Muslims murdered, merchants out enjoying life that they snuck up on and slaughtered, and those they didn't slaughter, they abducted and sold for ransom. And he's saying that projecting his perceptions on the victims. And he is mocking them and said, you taunted me and said, if you are telling the truth, then since we don't believe you, go ahead, bring on the day of doom. Have the sky fall, have the mountains run away. Have your God show up to torture us because we think all this is a fake. So as a result of Mohammad incentivizing men to act murderously, viciously, Allah takes credit and he demeans the victims, saying that you asked for this and now it has come to you. And they didn't ask to be slaughtered. They didn't ask to be kidnapped. They didn't ask to be robbed. You're a piece of shit liar, Allah. It's just the only way to look at it. And yes, I know that I have previously said that Muhammad and Allah were alter egos, that they were both savage psychopaths. Well, that's true. But there actually is a distinction between Allah and Muhammad. Allah is the snake that slithered out of the garden. He is Hasatan. And he despises Muhammad as much as he despises all other humans. Muhammad served as his voice and as a corporeal manifestation of his nature. That's why Muhammad was a rapist and a pedophile, incestuous, a mass murdering human trafficker and slaver, a thief, a liar, all of these things. So then he's telling the Quraysh, who have been the custodians of the Kaaba, where Allah really wasn't even a god. Allah wasn't revered in the Kaaba, which is an interesting aspect of Islam's lore that the Muslims don't want you to know. Where now they have the black stone in the size of that ugly block building covered in the black drape. Allah wasn't there. It was Alat, Manat, Aluza, Harat, and some 360 some odd other rock gods and goddesses. That's the simple truth of it. And so he's now trying to convince the Quraysh, Muhammad's family and the caretakers of the Kaaba, the very people who invented Islam with the Hajj and the prostration prayer and the zakat tax, all of it was conceived as part of the pagan religion by the Quraysh that was ripped off by Muhammad. He says, so you should return or revoke, whatever that means. I guess they both started with an R in English, so that's clever enough. We will return and revoke. What does that mean? So if you cease and desist, it will be better for you. How can they cease and desist? You killed them. But if you return, what, are they going to be reincarnation or revoke? Revoke means to dishonor an agreement. I made a deal, but I revoked it. So return, which is pretty hard to do since you killed them. And what agreement are they going to revoke? The Kaaba? The Hajj? The prostration prayer? Circumambulation? What are they going to revoke? And why is return and revoke together unless we're dealing with a cluttered mind that isn't capable of communicating intelligently? And then he says, we will return and revoke. Oh, I've got problems with both. Allah is nothing more than that snake that slithered out of the garden. Return to what? He's not returning to the garden. And I understand that he has revoked everything. He has revoked life, truth, the identity of God. And never will it avail. Who? Well, the last sentence says, we will return and revoke and never will it avail. If you're following along, it means that Allah is saying, I have no chance of succeeding. Then he says, your forces are nothing, even if numerous. There were a total of 80 merchants, overweight, balding, fat men. And you want to say that that's a numerous force? You came at them with 5 times that many murderous militants. And you want to say that doesn't matter, your forces are nothing? Maybe Allah needed a looking glass to see how he would fare and how his militants would fare against Jews when they outnumbered Jews 100-1 and got spanked down every time they tried to perpetrate genocide on God's people. If Allahu and Allah is with the believers, then he is your liability. Now, out of touch with reality, Allah is having an imaginary conversation, of course, with people who had stopped listening to him a decade ago in Kabbaville, and now his Rasuli was in Yathrib, and oh, by the way, he had just had his goons kill them. So these were a waste of words, although they were exceedingly revealing and nasty. But that is not to say that they don't have value to us. By lecturing the dead, the abused, and distant, Allah demonstrated the extent of his psychosis, just like had Mohammad when he walked up to the trench where the dead and mutilated bodies that were putrefying, stunk to high heaven, were all, and he kept on talking to them and pretending that they could actually listen to him. Well, Allah's got the same psychosis. They both are like the torturers of the Inquisition, of the Third Reich, where they got their jollies at demeaning the victims they were abusing. It's like the Muslims on 10/7, after cutting off the fingers and toes of little children in front of their parents for their amusement. They set everyone on fire and then peed on them. And then, while they burn, they sat down at the dining table to eat their Shabat supper. Gloating. This is an evil beyond the comprehension of most people. Recognizing that he was unable to deliver on the threatened day of doom, and still hasn't, by the way, this prophecy on the day of doom. Somebody finally nailed Mohammad down and said, when is the day of doom going to come? And he indicated it would come 500 years after his first revelation, which would have been sometime in 1120-ish CE in the 12th century. 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st. We're 9, Wookie, you can count that high. We're 9 centuries past his deadline. So much for being a prophet. So, Yada Yahowah, by suggesting that this sandlot skirmish was equivalent to his delusional, the sky will fall, the mountains will run away, and I will start to stoke hell's fires with your bodies and then roast you alive for eternity. He's delusional. Delusional gods typically don't make good ones, nor do sadistic and demented ones. Since these Arabs were merely safeguarding their wares, the victims, and since the Muslims were on the prowl trying to steal their possessions that belonged to others, Your family members. The convoluted reasoning presented in the surah is the same strategy modern Muslims foist on the ignorant media. When Israelis defend themselves from Islamic terror, they are recast as the aggressors, as colonizers, occupiers, and international criminals promoting genocide, when the exact opposite not only is true, but it's obvious. And we live in such a dumbed down world, such a microcosm of rock, that nobody's smart enough to figure it out. God, if your artificial intelligence, has the cord unplugged from the wall, how is there any hope for 2 generations of people who have been indoctrinated by the very morons that programmed it? With situational scriptures issued and history twisted, it was time to reinforce the purpose of Islam. But we can't say, well, we're going to say the Islamic political and military dogma. But in repeating himself in so doing, Allah reminds us of his failing memory. He was having a Joe Biden moment. Quran 8:20. Quran 8:20. Plain Allah. O you who will believe. O you who believe. Obey Allah and his Rasul. Okay. You're going to obey the one who told you that there are 2 types of Muslims, those who have died fighting to the death and those who are waiting for the opportunity to die fighting and killing non-Muslims. You must obey him. And how are you to obey his Rasul, his messenger, unless you know what his messenger said? And you can't know what his messenger said unless you read the hadith, which are from Mohammad and the goons that surrounded him. And oh, guess, Gronk, how would you surmise that the words of Mohammad and the words of Allah are contrary to Islamic teaching? Do we need a class in logic, Gronk? And do not turn away from him while you hear. Quran 8:21. And not be like those who say, we heard, while they hear not. 8:20. I mean, this is written at a level beneath sadistic Dick and Jane. Dick and Jane do a seance while pretending to be Charlie Manson. We heard, while they listen not. Lo, the vilest and worst of the creatures as beasts near the sight of Allahi, the deaf, the dumb, and those who have no sense. Quran 8:23. And had Allahu found any good in them, surely he would have made them listen. And if he had made them hear, surely they would have turned away while shunning and shying away. So, Allah Yahowah, more popularly known as Allah, is saying, okay, I get it. 99.99% of those who heard these recitals and witnessed the behavior of Muhammad and the first Muslims rejected Allah, Islam, and the Quran. I realize that, okay, I get it, but that was all by design. That is because they heard, but they did not hear. So they were not hearing the recital that they rejected, which is probably impossible. But nonetheless, they did not hear the recital, which is an oral testimony, that they rejected, which they could not have rejected unless they heard it. But nonetheless, if Allah wanted them to hear it, they would have heard it. And if they'd heard it, they would have turned away while shunning and shying away. If he had made them hear, surely they would have turned away, shunning and shying away. Say, what? Now you're saying, okay, there was a Quran recital. They said they heard it, but no, they didn't hear it. They rejected it. And if Allah wanted them to hear, then you can be certain they would have shunned it and shied away. I mean, this is so stupid. It hurts. I mean, I'm a reasonably rational, intelligent fellow. And when I have to share such drivel with you, I have a grok moment where the wires go. I am sorry there, Wook. You ever have one of those moments? Yeah, you okay, Dad? Okay, I'll make it all better. This is easily the dumbest pretense of a God ever conceived by humankind. This is the most intellectually stunted book ever perceived to be Scripture. You can't be dumber than this. And it's not just dumb, which this is really, on the 1 to 10 scale of dumb, this is a billion. But it's demented. It's sadistic. It's murderous. It's in grotesque opposition to life. And we're reading out of the Quran. There is no excuse for this. That's why I beg people, stop burning the goddamn book. Start reading it and sharing what it says. And you would think that even though indoctrinated and out of their minds, living in planalia as opposed to earth, that the libertards, if they actually knew that the Quran was this repulsive and this moronic, that they wouldn't be out there supporting the death cult. And so I'm encouraging people to read it, to share it. That's why we do these programs. Wookie, you don't need to jump down there. It's okay, I know. It will be over in a minute. So when you consider the audience and the circumstance, this is transparent. Mohammad was lashing out against the good people of Yathrib, today's Medina, and calling them bad Muslims for not following his orders to fight and loot people with whom they had no beef. This is to say that the neophyte Muslims were still at a place where they knew right from wrong. Not every conscience worked, but some of them still had one that functioned. And it told them that, piracy, terrorism, murder, kidnapping, ransom, thievery were all bad things. And they were punishable offenses. And being a merchant was not. As such, they were still good people. So Muhammad ordered them to become sand pirates, to become bad people. They turned away, they chafed at the demand, wondering why they had allowed this malcontent and murderous man to infiltrate their city. The good Muslims, however, like their counterparts today, were fully corrupted by Islam. They could no longer distinguish right from wrong. So they zealously followed the profiteer on raids to pillage and to plunder. While it is obvious that this demented doctrine must be exposed and held accountable for its crimes, bad Muslims should be leading the parade. Their faux deity just called them the vilest of creatures. Yes, any Muslim who does not follow Muhammad's orders to murder infidels, to pillage and plunder them, is deaf and dumb, senseless, the worst of beasts. Allah hates them above all else. Peace-loving Muslims are despised by the wannabe God of Islam even more than Jews. You want to know what's really happening in Syria? or the really good Muslims, as part of ISIS, are perpetrating genocide through apartheid on the Alawite Muslims who they think are inferior to them? This is the answer. That's why Islam can't be fixed, cannot be resolved. So I would encourage any Muslim listening to these words to let them sink in. Your God condemns you if you do not lash out in jihad, if you do not fight to the death for his demented cause. If we are to pretend that the Quran is somehow true, play make-believe. If Allah were really a God, if Muhammad had been a prophet, then if you are a peaceful, loving Muslim, then you are destined for a hell even more torturous than that is prepared for the hospitality of the infidels. It's lose-lose with your soul at stake. If Islam is true, you're toast. Literally. If Islam is a lie, you live in the poverty of a delusional doctrine that will rob you of everything worthwhile. And it doesn't have to be that way. And that's why I do this program. Are you listening, Gonk? Are you listening, Elon Musk? Are you listening, Larry Page? And I know you have already started to listen, Mark Zuckerberg, because you've paved the way for honest discourse. I applaud you for that. Before we leave this indictment of Islam, I'd like to address the opening salvo of the 20th verse. Mohammad said that any time he speaks, he must be believed, he must be followed, he must be obeyed. Not Allah, him. Even Ishaq agrees. Ishaq 3:22. Allah said, do not turn away from Muhammad when he is speaking to you. Do not contradict his orders. Do not be a hypocrite, one who pretends to be obedient to him and then disobeys him. Those who do so will receive my vengeance. You must respond to the apostle when he summons you to war. I have nothing more to add at this time. My name is Craig Winn, and this has been an episode of the YAHOWAH blog for the benefit of all humankind.